Hi, and happy Wednesday, everybody. I am Marcy Mallory with the Pennsylvania Parks and Forests Foundation, and Dr. Alan Dieterich-Ward is here with us today as we continue to explore Pennsylvania's conservation history and heritage through his book Cradle of Conservation and some of the new initiatives that are happening as part of this larger conservation heritage project. So, Alan, thank you for joining us again.
Marcy, as always, there's no place I'd rather be on the third Wednesday of the month.
Well, it's exciting to be here and exciting to hear about what's happening with continuation of oral histories. And if you're new to viewing these monthly podcasts, these monthly conversations, as always, if you have a question, put it into the comment box and I'll be monitoring that and make sure when the time is appropriate, I will make sure that Alan gets that question.
Right.
So Alan, let's launch in. I would love to hear more about the Oral History Project.
Yes. So I don't know the extent to which folks know, but one of the big things that round two of the Pennsylvania Conservation Heritage Project did was to initiate an oral history project that was overseen by Dr. Ken Walensky, who was a longtime member of our steering committee and was a sort of a fixture at the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. And so he oversaw this oral history project that I think probably, I can't remember exactly, maybe included 20 or more than 20 people.
More than 20.
Over two rounds. Everyone from our old friend Bill Forey, kind of the dawn of state park management, under Maurice Goddard, and then afterward, and of course, who has the 2-book series on Pennsylvania state parks. Everyone from him to Dave Hess, who's had prominent roles in state government. I think Cindy, our friend Cindy Dunn, was interviewed. Karen Glotfelty. A lot of, I think you, in fact, I didn't want to say anything, but
I was, in fact,
but you were, and so we that project ended up with being deposited in the state archives, and then a summary of all of the different interviews are included on our conservation heritage website. We weren't able to, at the time, the technology was such that it was super duper expensive to transcribe. Kind of going from straight audio to transcription took a lot of time and a lot of money, of course. And so the first thing, as we started thinking about, are we ready? It's been 10 years. Are we ready for kind of a new round of oral histories? Was going back and revisiting those. And with the changes in technology, some of which we're on right now, transcription, sort of, automatic transcription is so much faster now. And so our first order of business is that we, thanks to the generosity here of my colleagues at Shippensburg University, we have a graduate assistant who is going back through and is running those oral histories through a digital transcription service to get a rough draft. And then he is then going through and editing those. So we will actually have full transcripts of those.
Awesome. I didn't know about that. That's great.
That will be. See, that's my little surprise for you, Marcy. And I just, he's out, little busy beaver out there right across the hall, working on them now. He started with Karen Glotfelty, and he said he has hers finished. He actually has them a rough draft. He's run all of them through the auto transcriber. So he has a rough draft of all of them, and is working his way through. He has Karen's done. He is working on Pete Duncan's right now, awesome. and then after that, he's going to switch to Jim Seif, who started out his career in Pennsylvania environmental policy in the district attorney's office, and was involved with later Governor Ridge who was district attorney at the time, in one of the very first, it's kind of on the federal level, one of the very first kind of federal environmental lawsuits filed in the state, which is kind of this cool little story that's not very well known. So I'm excited to get, anyway, he later on becomes a DER secretary and does lots of other things too. But I'm excited to get his oral history. But I'm hoping, fingers crossed, depending on how fast he can work, by the end of the semester, and hopefully by the end, at latest by the end of the year, we will have all of those transcribed, and then we're going to build ourselves a nice space on the Conservation Heritage Project website to post those recordings and the transcripts to kind of really make them more available for the first time since we did them. So that's cool.
That's really good news. And in the interim, I did post in the chat box a link to the oral history summaries.
Good.
So people can see those and learn more about some of these conservation leaders and icons.
Right. Yeah, and they're really, really useful and interesting. We're at a moment right now where there are all kinds of questions about what should the future of environmental policy be, regulation be, and it's really, really important for us to say, okay, we really have 50 years now. So, the environmental revolution in Pennsylvania happened really in that kind of 1968 to 1972 kind of time period. We're at 50 years from that now, and kind of thinking through this trajectory of environmental policy through leadership of both parties, through deindustrialization, through environmental justice, really stepping back and doing a close analysis of that, I think is going to be really useful for all of us in the environmental community. Okay, so that's the first thing that we're kind of working on. Now, the second thing is doing a new round of oral histories. And we learned some lessons, I think, from our earlier oral histories, and that is that as important as it is to get these stories documented, right, to sort of get them captured, equally important to that is thinking about how we are going to use them, how we will make them accessible. What is beyond sort of recording these and then transcribing them, what do we do with them? And that has really been sort of a point of conversation for the last 6 months of folks on the Conservation Heritage Project Steering Committee. And what we're going to do is this, just to give you to give our viewers a sense of what we're thinking. And please put your ideas in the chat. Give us your thoughts. Give us your feedback. We're really in the development stage of this. We're looking at what the Alumni Association of the Environmental Protection Agency. Hold on, just give me 1 second here and pull it up there. You can see my window, but let me pull, nope, not that one either. I got to pull up the right screen. I thought I had this ready, but obviously I didn't. Nope.
The interview?
No, it's a different one.
Okay.
I want to, I'm going to share this window, but then I'm going to go here. Okay, so EPA Alumni Association. There we go. Can you see my web browser now?
Yep, I just put it up.
Great. Okay, great. So we're kind of going to use no other. I want to say this: no other state has attempted this, right? Pennsylvania, as in so many areas, we're really looking to be the leader in sort of understanding our conservation history. The EPA Alumni Association, if you take a look on their website, and anybody can do this, they have a really, I should note, it's starting to look a little bit 2005 here. I realize that in terms of the aesthetics, but in terms of the content, they have just this wonderful online public history accessible archives. What we're trying to do with the Conservation Heritage Project, of course, that includes extensive oral histories of key leaders, right? And so we're thinking about how do we not just sort of capture the stories, but actually, put them in a format that is engaging and that will kind of allow us to sort of engage with them as we go, but also bring together different aspects to kind of tell a fuller story and to really allow us to really begin to analyze, what has worked, what has not worked as well, et cetera. And so we're kind of looking at this, and you can see, I'll actually show you an example. Bill Eichbaum, Bill Seith, who I just mentioned, Jim Seith, who I just mentioned. Yep, Jim Seith, who I just mentioned. Jim is actually featured on here. I just have to find it somewhere. Where is he? See, this is one of those things where I get this inspiration in the moment, and it's probably not. Should have probably started this out. I should be able to find it real quick, though. Give me 1 second. And if I don't, then I'll just ignore it. Where is it? Come on.
Well, what you're doing is you're doing a good job giving us a tour. So I didn't realize that this existed. So
that's right.
It's kind of exciting.
Right. This this is for me kind of the model of what we can do. And,
Okay.
And if I can find Jim, I'll show it to you. If not, then we'll just move on with our lives. But you can imagine here, right? Having the videos, having sort of text analysis embedded. I don't know why it's not showing up. He's there. I promise he's there, but we won't worry about it. Having the oral histories along with, I'm imagining, links to the constitutional amendment, right? Links to kind of key pieces of legislation, the Clean Water, the Pennsylvania Clean Water Act, Clean Streams, kind of being able to kind of pull all of that into a place that is publicly accessible and easy and available, that really is kind of what we're aiming to do going forward. I don't know why it's not showing what I want to see. I'll back.
Well, I did put it in the chat, so if people want to look independently, it's there. They can follow it and maybe find out about some other key leaders that they didn't 100%. Know about.
And I'm imagining, and we've talked through this, as part of this new oral history project, this means that we have to do things in a certain way. Like we have to make sure that we have good lighting, right? We have to make sure that we have sort of a back and forth discussion of how we want the interview to flow. We really want to keep these to an hour each that are kind of focused on particular periods of time, and that sort of get to key ideas so that we can then more easily sort of put them into a format that is engaging. I'm imagining, and we have kind of programmed in, that after we get a first round of people done and we're focusing on the strike force, this original sort of environmental regulatory push in the 1970s, so the environmental strike force, that once we get sort of at different stages of as we explore this, we'll then do symposia, and we can have 3 or 4 people who all engaged on a similar topic come and we'll do an online Zoom roundtable session like you can see here, right? The EPA, they have a topic, the early imitation of the Clean Air Act of 1970 in California, and then they do an hour-long symposium where they have the people who are involved in that come together and talk through key ideas, which are then transcribed and made available, right? So you can imagine sort of individual stories, but then also key ideas, key concepts, key pieces of legislation where we can pull together regulators. You spent a lot of time, Marcy, your career in the sort of nonprofit sector, and nonprofit organizations have led the charge in terms of a lot of environmental and conservation issues. Bring those folks together to have these retrospective talks, and then all of that gets kind of bundled together into this online platform, which will help us to tell our story and to learn lessons, right? So this is kind of the model that we're using as we get started in this new round of oral histories.
Excellent. Now, you mentioned the strike force, and I think that many of our listeners and watchers may not know what the strike force is. So could you just take a beat and explain the strike force?
Well, Marcy, I can do better than that because I brought for you today a sample from our very first interview that I completed about hot off the press about 2 weeks ago. I interviewed Bill Eichbaum, who I'll let him tell it in his own words, but was a young law school grad in the late 60s who was involved in this newfangled environmental movement, and was asked by the then Attorney General to put together a team of lawyers to work on developing this new thing called environmental regulation here in Pennsylvania. So let's take a listen to the first few minutes of that interview, and you can. And I wanted to start out. You were a pivotal person in. Can you hear it?
Yes.
Can you see it? Is it shared?
It is shared, and it was playing, and it just
I paused it because I wanted to make sure we were good. Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Yes.
All right. And I'll try to make it full screen if I can. Here you go. Getting the strike force started, but I'm really interested in hearing, how did you get involved in environmental politics and regulation in the first place?
Oh, I suppose the strike force was started in 1970, and I had graduated from law school in 1966. And entered practice in Philadelphia, and in the summer of that year became a member of the bar. I quickly became active in helping to organize the Sierra Club in Pennsylvania, I can remember trips that I took up through central Pennsylvania, knocking on doors of people that I thought, because of addresses I had, might be interested in joining the Sierra Club. I also it's building on that interest. I actually ended up creating and teaching a course in environmental law at the Free Law School of Philadelphia, which I founded in 1968 with another young practitioner in the city. And we held our classes at Drexel University. They did not academically recognize us, but they did give us a free room and ability to attract their diverse student body. So I taught that, created and taught that course, which I think may well have been the first, quote, environmental course taught in any building of a university in the United States. And then I actually ended up with Bob Sugarman, who was in private practice, filing a lawsuit to prevent the dredging of Tenneca Marsh and the creeks adjacent to it for the construction of I-95 in front of or adjacent to Philadelphia International Airport. And that lawsuit was a federal lawsuit against the federal government, in which a major count was that to dredge without doing an environmental impact assessment of the effects of the dredging would be a violation of the then new National Environmental Policy Act. And I think that was the first lawsuit filed in the country that actually used NEPA as a count in the lawsuit. So I sort of had this activist plus legal background that was, for 1970, pretty rich. And so when the Attorney General, Fred Speaker, looked for a lawyer that might be able to help him do what he wanted to do, my name popped up.
Wow, that would absolutely be a relatively unique set of experiences for 1970. The thing that Fred Speaker asked you to do to launch what he was calling an environmental strike force, what was the rationale behind that?
Well, that's a good question. I actually got a phone call from Fred Speaker on a Monday morning in my offices. I worked for Community Legal Services in an office in North Broad Street, and he had two questions. His first question was, do you think there needs to be a stronger system of enforcing environmental laws? And we talked about that for a while. And then his second question is, well, if you agree with that, would you be interested in helping out with that effort? And my answer to both of those questions was yes. He had just been appointed Attorney General, which was within the powers of the governor then. His predecessor had actually died in an airplane accident. He only had 6 months of a term. He wanted to make an impact. There was a great deal of concern, as folks know, in the late 60s, early 70s, about enforcement and of environmental statutes. And so Fred thought something ought to be done, and he could do it even in that 6-month period. And we talked on Monday morning. I said I was interested. I was in his offices on Wednesday. We talked about it further, and we decided that we would call it an environmental pollution strike force. And part of that being the urgency of action, that this was not going to be a leisurely undertaking, and the focus would obviously be on the environment. So 2 weeks later, we were in business.
That's really amazing. And you know, I think about the kinds of strike forces, that term being used in sort of organized crime, you know, which was a big impulse at that time as well. And I'm imagining that sort of settling on that name strike force and the sense of urgency that you felt about what you were doing shaped the way that you and your colleagues, this new group of colleagues, viewed the work that you were being asked to do.
I think that's right. I think the major impetus was urgency and effectiveness. We were not necessarily interested in a criminal orientation to the enforcement of the statutes. When I put together what literally in a week was a team of 4 lawyers, including myself, 3 from Philadelphia, and then eventually additional one from Pittsburgh. And our first task was to go through the files of the then Department of Health in the state, which was responsible for the environmental pollution statutes, primarily air, water, solid waste, and see what the violation status was. And of course, we uncovered, they weren't secret, they were there in the files, numerous inspection reports cataloging and chronicling violations. So there was a record and the raw material there for appropriate enforcement actions to be taken. And we were able to do that very quickly. I think in the first 2 months of our work, so we started in August of 1970, by the fall of that year, we filed more than 60 lawsuits.
And how did you choose which cases to explore? It sounds like you were sort of brought in essence to clear a backlog of things that hadn't been resolved. How did you choose which ones to focus on?
I think it was a variety of factors. One factor was just the egregiousness of the fact situation. How serious were these? A second factor was to apply the law as it then existed, which had not been tested in the courts very much, to those facts, so that you would have a case that was likely to prevail. And then thirdly was public interest. And I think it's worth observing in that first period of time, probably one of our most publicly cases that was in the public eye was a case known as Barnes and Tucker, which involved a coal company up on the banks of the west bank of the Susquehanna that had a accidental massive spill of acid mine drainage into the Susquehanna River. That captured a huge amount of public interest. It was a complicated, difficult case. It eventually went to the Supreme Court, but it was an important case in the history of regulating coal mining in the state. It was of great public interest, and we took it on with enthusiasm, but it was new territory.
So there you go. You asked me what the strike force was, and there it was in Bill Eichbaum's own words. Of course, with the creation of the Department of Environmental Resources, this sort of ragtag group of environmental lawyers would go on to really be the core of the new Department of the regulatory enforcement wing of the Department of Environmental Resources, with Bill as the first Deputy Secretary for Enforcement. So those kinds of, I think, really interesting and powerful stories, they deserve to be told, and they deserve to be told, I think, in a way that is engaging. You could see, as that, we're used to talking heads in Zoom now, but to my mind, that format, we had the lighting good, we're making sure we have the audio good. That for a relatively shoestring budget, as with everything we do with the Conservation Heritage Project, we can come up with a really good result, and one that we don't need, that's not going to get buried in the archives, but that is going to be available for interested folks to view.
Yeah, that was very engaging, and I loved how he was recruited. It said, "Hey, what do you think of this idea?" And then, "Hey, why don't you become a part of it?"
Well,
I think I'm going to use that tactic.
That's right. And I should say later on in the interview, Bill will actually come back to that moment a bit and talk that one of the things that I didn't know before, and I've known Bill for a while, one of the things I didn't know about his sort of origins was that he helped to plan the first Earth Day in Philadelphia, which was really a full Earth Week. Redbone played, and
Wow.
Ralph Nader came, and I think they trashed a car, or did all did all of these things. Bill was there when they did that first Earth Day as part of this kind of cadre of young environmental lawyers and activists, and to sort of to be able to kind of start with him and follow his career through that's giving us kind of a good starting point. We have our next interview. I'm in the process of nailing down the date for that. It's going to be with Mary Harris. I don't know if you know Mary or not, but she was the first chair of the Council of Environmental Quality, that is an advisory board for environmental regulation, at the state level. And then Tim Weston, who you may know well.
I do know Tim very well.
Tim is kind of going to be the third. We're really looking, it's going to be, we're curating this. We're thinking about, we can't interview every single person that's ever been involved with environmental regulation. Or I guess it can be done, but not by me. But we're really thinking about how do we go about getting this sort of range of ideas, range of stories to kind of fill in the different elements. Again, Bill is kind of giving his perspective, but as I noted, environmental regulation in Pennsylvania is a multiple layered thing. It's not just about the state level enforcement. It's also going to involve the federal government and the EPA regional administrator. Of course, it also involves the development of these new environmental organizations. Bill mentioned the Sierra Club, which really sort of dramatically shifts its focus from what it was founded as to what it has become during this time period. And so being able to get that story kind of with a focus on Pennsylvania, again, these stories are often told from the national level, but these are not solely national stories. They're really about sort of states and localities, and our goal is to really be able to give that level of detail and nuance to the state level that that has kind of primarily been given to the federal level in the past.
Now, will we be tagging these so that I think you could look at Bill from a couple of different perspectives? Obviously, grassroots organizing, and then as a lawyer, and love the whole concept of the free classes. We'll be tagging it so that if somebody goes to the website, they'll be able to dig in a little bit deeper and look for people based on maybe they're doing a paper or they're inspired to follow in somebody's footsteps.
Yes. So ultimately, we're in practical terms. What we're trying to do now, is to get a process set up so that we can be systematic and sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? That we have a quality control system to make sure that all of our interviews are going to have a particular style and a particular structure, and a particular uniformity, so that we can do exactly the things you're talking about. Okay. By keeping them, by sort of insisting on or framing them out as with some standards to start with, that will then give us the ability to kind of apply these tags. I'm also thinking about in terms of kind of chapters or sections, right? How can we and you saw a little bit of that on the EPA site, where you can kind of easily get to the things that you're most interested in, or be able to group pieces of interviews together by topic and by subject. Those are the goals that we're going to have. Right now, my goal for this fall is to say we're going to do our first 5 interviews, really build a system out that we're really happy with, begin to translate that into what do we want the website to look like, what kind of symposium might we set up, I'm really looking to get kind of a sample of, again, setting up as 5, that kind of gives us enough where then we can start playing around with what are the tags, what are the elements, what are the other pieces that we want to be able to apply as we are going on.
Right. And I do want to give the shout out to Foundation for Pennsylvania's Watersheds, as they are helping to fund this project, along with the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources and the Department of Environmental Protection.
That's right.
So, this capturing stories, takes a village of people that are engaged to interview, as well as, the funders to make it happen. So we appreciate their support.
Absolutely grateful. And I think, going back and sort of making sure that we are bringing into the fold the work that we have done before, that we're sort of celebrating, recognizing our first round of oral histories a decade or so ago. For example, in addition, by getting those sort of transcribed properly, some of the people that were interviewed in those earlier things, we're going to come back and interview again for this, because we only have audio, and if we want to kind of structure them and bring them into what we're doing now. But of course, I'll be going back through and sort of reviewing all of that back information so that we can do a better job of sort of targeting our questions and structuring the interview itself to really get at the most important elements.
Yeah, that's amazing. And we appreciate the work that you and other members of the team are doing to capture these important histories before it's too late, before we aren't able to capture them. So we're winding up on time, so I want to make sure that we allow people a little chance to eat lunch.
Yep. Well, and
including ourselves.
And I should say, as you say, this takes a village. We want everyone who's interested in these ideas, reach out to me or Marcy with your ideas, with suggestions. Who might we miss that we need to have to tell the story? And because I should mention, this is not just a story of this is a story of celebration, sure, but even the people on our our lead team, even those folks. I won't name names, but of our kind of oral history steering project, one of the members actually fired one of the other members from a position back in the day, right? And so, we're our goal is to be able to kind of look back upon and reflect upon the twists and turns of conservation and environmental policy over the last 50 years to kind of come up with a non-biased evaluation. Looking toward, what's the future in these key areas.
And Alan, I'll just build on that in that it doesn't have to be a state level person. I mean, I think about Zulaine Mayfield, who we have a documentary. She was organizing in Chester, and it's an amazing story of standing up for what's right for your neighborhood. And so there are people all across the Commonwealth.
On the state and national level. Absolutely.
Yes. So there are people all across the Commonwealth who have done very good things, whose stories haven't been captured. And those are the kind of stories, maybe if we don't do an oral history, we might put them in our story section. So there's place to record that, because they're all inspirational and they all contribute to the conservation heritage of the Commonwealth.
And that's right. And to just kind of end with this, because we want to give folks time to have lunch. To be frank, Marcy, I think my ultimate goal is to be able to put together a set of standards that we can then sort of put out in the world for other folks to use and then submit to us. You think of StoryCorps or some of these other sort of online archiving. My goal is, even as kind of and our team are focusing in on what we have the time to do, what I'd really love for us to be able to do is to have a set of standards for folks, so that if folks want to be able to sort of add to our collection, that they're going to be able to do so and submit that to us, and us be able to include it, even if we're kind of even if it's something that we're farming out to all of our kind of collaborators to do, rather than that we are doing directly ourselves.
It sounds like a great hands-on learning project for classrooms as well.
That's right.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Alan Dieterich-Ward, again, for sharing your expertise and your passion. PAConservationHeritage.org is the website. There are some links in the chat for things that we talked about today. So until next month, have a great time and happy fall.
Thanks. And for anyone going to the Pennsylvania Trails and Greenways Conference next week, maybe I'll get to see you there. I'm giving a talk. I'm a part of a panel presentation on rails trails.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye.